Hey there. Welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this evening. I usually record this during the day, but I happen to have some time here tonight, and so I thought, you know what? Let's do First Look After Dark or something like that. Um, yeah, it's just one of those nights where I happen to have the time, so it's like, why not? Now, whenever you get First Look After Dark, you also get tea because I may be a caffeine fanatic, but I'm not a crazy person. It's whatever time it is, 9:30. I'm not drinking coffee right now, but I will have some tea because you know you gotta have something. I think I do all this better if it looks like I'm, you know what I mean, if I'm doing that whole thing, because the sip and the contemplation thing. Anyway, week 4 in Lent. Um, I've liked, I've liked where this has gone. Um, we've been talking a lot about the gifts that we receive in Lent, rather than like when I'm doing, giving something up, taking something on, the discipline element of it, which I hope is there for you in whatever way that means for you. But I really thought that this was maybe a unique way of looking at it. So thanks for doing it with me. So we just talked about equity, and that one was tricky. I wasn't really sure exactly where I wanted to go, but then I remembered this image, and if you had a chance to see the sermon, or to hear the sermon, or read the sermon, then you know what image I'm talking about. And so I think it worked. I hope that it did. I got some good feedback about, like, oh, I haven't heard a sermon that was about equity over equality, and how that pertains to the message of Jesus. And so anytime you can do something like that, then that's great. So we're going to go from covenant and inheritance and equity, now to our fourth gift. And the gift that I'm thinking about this time is freedom. And what better passage to use when we talk about freedom? I suppose there's a handful of them, but this is John 3. So John 14-21, so John 3:16 is right there in the middle of that. And I think that the challenge this Sunday will be, I feel like every time I preach on John 3, I usually mention the signs that are held up in the end zone at a football game, that's why we know it. So I'm going to try not to say that. I think if I say it here, then that doesn't count. It's like calories on Christmas or whatever, they don't count. Like, it's that it's that kind of vibe. So that's where we're headed. And this passage is it's so heavy and miraculous and interesting. And actually, now that I think about it, this is a good one for me to be doing this after dark, and to be doing this at night, because the whole passage takes place after dark, at night. That was an accident. I didn't even think about that until right this second. But it's kind of done so that others wouldn't see. And I think that was one of the things that strikes me about the theme, and what it, like, just the framing of the passage itself. Because you have this text with Nicodemus in it, being this high official who serves not only as a Pharisee, but as a part of the Sanhedrin and the religious court. And so you have this person who is clearly intrigued and fascinated and feels compelled to meet with Jesus. And Jesus takes the meeting. And we have this famous interaction where Nicodemus is trying to come to terms with and understand what on earth Jesus is saying. And it's this beautiful parallel for me between this text and the woman at the well text, both of which are describing salvation in some way, shape, or form. Jesus using this kind of metaphoric language, and the person in front of him basically having absolutely no idea what's going on. And the one being this very learned, respected part of society, and the other a common person who's one not named in the story, is looked down upon because she's a Samaritan, and is equally looked down upon for the relationships that she's had, and not being married and what have you. And so you have these two parallel folks who kind of get it in the end, get what Jesus is saying. She understands it. She is able to proclaim it and come to terms with it, I think, much faster and much more passionately than Nicodemus is, although he is eventually able to redeem that through the ways that he acts around the crucifixion. But it's a fascinating parallel. But if you think about this story as one of our freedom from a salvation standpoint, it's also this juxtaposition of this person, Nicodemus, who does not feel free at all to even have a conversation with Jesus, except for night and secrecy and all of that. So it's a really the context and just the surroundings of the passage are really as fascinating as the theology of it. Obviously, the theology is world-changing, but what's happening in the story to the people in the story is equally as fascinating. So I barely feel like I need to read it because, of course, it so well. But I always think that making sure that I'm reading a few verses before and after is important. And I'm going to mention this story about Moses, and it's worth mentioning to you. But it's one of those texts. This Moses story that's mentioned here is one of those texts that you've probably heard someone smarter than me preach about John 3 and either parallel the two stories or mention the two stories or draw a line between them or something like that. You probably don't need me to do that because, again, someone else has done it before and I'm sure done it well. But I'll mention it here just because this is why you do First Look, just for the bonus material. All right. So John 3:14, which first of all is I think the whole way that the book of John starts is fascinating, because of course John chapter 1 famously shouts. It's almost like an album. If you're looking at this like an album, John 1 is all about Jesus, who is transcendent, right? Jesus is the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and nothing came. All of that. Jesus is bigger than the room, bigger than all of us, transcends time and space, right? And then pivots so hard. It's like the next track, chapter 2, pivots so hard to a much more existential experience, Jesus flipping over the tables, which is what we just did. Justice and equality and fairness and wholeness and restoring things for the people right in front of him. And then this hard pivot again, back to something that's bigger, seeing Jesus through this other lens of what it means to be born again or born from above, and what it means to embody salvation right in front of us. John is a fascinating writer. I mean, I think even if you weren't a believing person, the way that John writes and the way that John, the world, the lens through which John sees Jesus or depicts Jesus, fascinating. Which is why Matthew and Mark and Luke are kind of thought of as, the word is synoptic, but you don't need to know the word, are grouped together, and John is sort of this outlier doing his own thing. And most of the thing he's doing that's outside of what the others are doing, one is that he doesn't follow the same order. You notice this story about him flipping over the tables comes right near the beginning and not near the end. And so the order of things and that transcendent idea, much more of an emphasis on that. But you probably know that because now I've been here a while and you've heard me say it before. All right, so John 3:14. Here we go. And just as Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Those who believe in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of the Son of God. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God. So the story I'm referring to, the Moses story, I apologize. This is a first look. So I honestly don't remember where in the story of Moses it comes from. I might be able to look up really quickly while I'm talking to you, but I honestly don't remember. But the story is basically that there was this Moses raises this serpent, and there's a plague of serpents, and he raises this serpent, and basically he stops the plague of snakes. So just as he raises up this serpent in the wilderness, you can go back and read the story and the whole thing. There's probably little details there that I'm not getting correct, but that's the basic story. That Moses is doing something, raising this thing up to, and in his action, saves the people from death. And then the same thing, of course, happens. The analogy here is what Jesus does. And maybe I can get to it or not. Who knows? Because you don't need me to be looking down this whole time trying to figure out if I can find this story about a serpent. Let's see. I may not be able to find it. I trust you to be able to look up. Just Google Moses serpent story and it'll come up. So the other interesting parallel, again, for me in this story, again, why freedom is a good, is the term that I chose as the gift that we receive through this passage, besides the obvious of salvation, is the parallel that you see between Moses and Jesus. Because the greatest connection that those two have is that they are emancipators. And that was the element of Jesus' messiahship, messiahness, state of being the Messiah, that would have made a whole lot of sense to the people. He wasn't the warrior king that the people were waiting for, but he was an emancipator. And so the most direct parallel that we have of Jesus with a Israelite emancipator would of course be Moses. Cyrus, which comes later after the exile. Cyrus, who is a Persian king, is also called an anointer, the anointed, because he is a emancipator. He's the one who frees the people. And I don't have that Bible reference either. I apologize. But it comes in the books that describe it's either it would either be Ezra or Nehemiah, I think, that describe their emancipation from exile by the Persian, Cyrus being called boy, I just forgot the word, being called anointed, the anointed one, the Messiah, because of what he does. So freedom comes up there with Moses as well, that parallel with Jesus. So in this story, you have, again, the juxtaposition of one who clearly does not feel free versus the one who is offering freedom. And then him giving a comparison to what he is doing to Moses, speaking of freedom to Nicodemus. When the interesting part, of course, is that when, in terms of position in society, what Nicodemus could have gotten away with just by his position as a Pharisee and as a part of the Sanhedrin, is that what he had to risk, of course, was the great freedoms that he enjoyed. That Nicodemus, just by meeting with Jesus, obviously, was putting his freedoms at risk. Another interesting parallel. And then, of course, this story, although this portion of the story doesn't talk about being born again, because that's what, of course, he explains over and over again, that you need to be born again. And he says, I don't understand what born again means. He's basically saying, you just made that term up. I don't know what that means. And he says, well, this is what it means. And I don't think he really gets it at first. So being born from above or being born again. And that idea to be born anew, or born not of the norm, there's an obvious freedom in that. A freedom from whatever weighed you down previously. But then, of course, the ultimate freedom that we have in this text is about salvation. That's the saving grace of Christ in our lives. And, there are 100 different ways of looking at that. And I think one of the most classic, and the ones that I think I've probably spent the most time thinking about, especially as a younger person, meaning as I was thinking through what salvation and what freedom in Christ meant when I was 20, is you start to try to come to terms with rules. You know, that your faith, that faith can feel like a bunch of rules. And I knew a lot of people when I was 20 who were really trying to, I think, kind of earn it in whatever way they saw fit. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to listen to this type of music. I'm not going to watch these types of movies. I'm not. We're very rule oriented, and I don't think that there's anything about that is inherently bad. But it did feel like I'd rather not. It felt more like they didn't want to come to terms with or face or struggle with how to be in the world and to pour something into it. The world was something to be feared. It was something to be guarded against. You know, it was like, I need people to help me, hold me accountable, you know, in whatever ways that means. The grappling with sin kind of thing. And I always felt bad because they always seemed very nerve-wracked. It was a nervous kind of thing. You know, there was always like, I'm gonna slip, you know, I'm gonna be tempted. There was always this sort of like, that like, basically meaning that sin was the more fun, or the life that they were trying to deny, they knew was more fun, and they were saying, I can't have that, which I think is a pretty frustrating way to live. Not because you want to be going out and doing things that can get you into trouble and are, you know, bad, and, you know, for all sorts of different types of reasons, but I think it was the reason they were doing it, because it was like it was based out of fear, not out of some kind of opportunity to do something better, or to love more, or to have compassion or grace for people. It was out of guarding, right? And that was the phrase that we used all the time, to be in the world but not of the world. At least, you know, that was popular when I was. And I certainly used that phrase. But there is a lack of engagement, I think, that is fear-based, that I think was at the core of that. And I always felt like, or I have felt over the years, like there must be some other way of living and experiencing the world, rather than just feeling like fearful that you're going to trip up. And I think that fear, I think, is what prevents people from loving their neighbor, or loving the person in front of them, or loving the stranger as completely or as openly as you could, because you're not living with a sense of exuberance, or a real passion for how can I get in there and love people. It's out of a fear of making a mistake, some moral trapping. And so you guard yourself. Where could I be doing this? Where could people fault me? Where am I going to make a misstep? It was like that moment. If you remember one of the Indiana Jones movies, where it's near the end. I think it's the third one, where he's trying to find the the chalice. I don't remember what they called it. And he has to step on the right stones to get past this like path. And if he steps on the wrong stone, then everything is going to go. But if he steps on the right stones, then he gets the prize. He gets to continue. And I felt like there's too many of us living like, well, if I love those people, or if I care about those people, or if I do this wrong, that I won't be as good enough of a Christian, and maybe Jesus won't love me anymore, or my parents won't love me, or whatever else people were really working through. And I think that was just a really difficult place to be, because I think otherwise we're you've heard me use the phrase loving with reckless abandon before. I think it prevents that, or at least it hinders it. And so I try to recognize that I'm going to make mistakes along the way. But if I'm not loving with my whole heart, then I'm missing something. And that's where the freedom lies. So, as always, I have absolutely no idea what of that will end up in the sermon on Sunday. I didn't think whenever I was doing this last week that I would end up standing on boxes in front of all of you, this close from some sort of, hospitalization disaster. But that's what I ended up doing. So luckily, I was able to get up on those boxes and not hurt myself or anybody else. So we'll see where this goes. All right. I care about all of you a great deal. I appreciate the fact that you're doing this with me. Thanks for staying up late. Well, you're not staying up late. I'm going to post this in a little while. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks for doing the Lenten journey with me. Thanks for having some tea. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.